What do crowdfunding, early access, and games as a service have in common? Now that sounds like the lead-in to a joke, doesn't it? But it's really not. In fact, it's a serious question that's worth serious money. There has, of course, been some huge successes in these areas, but it's got to be said that these don't always work out, and people find themselves perpetually waiting for releases or the next big update. But that's the point. That is one of the areas of commonality between these types of games. Not just the waiting, but rather the reason players are willing to wait. In a previous gaming age, we would wait months or years for the next big release. More often than not, the wait was worth it because the games were impressive, lots of fun, and very engaging. But somewhere along the line, how we play games has changed. Whilst we still regularly wait for years for the next epic game, we now also do a different type of waiting. We wait for the game as we play the game. Or, in some cases, we even spend money on the game whilst we wait year after year for its release. That one epic game, whether it is a few hours on a beloved platformer or tens of hours in a relatively large open world, is now no longer enough for a lot of players. And it's certainly not enough for the gaming industry. Now we have games that last for years, and in some cases decades. In short, many games are no longer seen as a product, but rather they have become a service. Whether the game of choice is supported by a subscription, an upfront purchase with future DLC, or microtransactions, or indeed any combination of these, the one clear intent is that the game's creators want players playing their game for as long as possible, and preferably spending money along the way. It's really not a bad business model if you think about it. When this works, it works well, and there are some great examples of subscription-based games that have lasted for well over a decade, and there are some genuinely good free-to-play games supported by microtransactions, not to mention those behemoth titles. Yet, when this business model fails, it fails spectacularly. Setting aside the money aspects of all this for a moment though, there is another constant that permeates most of the games under these banners, and that is arguably far more valuable and limited than money. And that is time. After all, it makes sense, doesn't it? If you want to create a game as a service, then you need to keep people hooked into that service, and seeing as games are not a utility like gas, electricity or your internet connection, they need to offer something else. In exchange for this service, the games are asking for that one very specific thing, and with people playing many of these games for not just hundreds of hours, but thousands of hours, there's clearly a huge market for this. Now, I don't really want to get into the mechanics of the gameplay here, because this is another common area that these games share. The huge, immense never-ending time sinks, also known as grind. It's a topic for another time, in another video at another place. Suffice to say, the nature of these time sinks can make or break a game. Finally, there's one more common ground that I want to touch on. Yes, it's a meme at this point, and a very old one, and it's often used in jest by both game developers and the player base alike. It goes back decades to some of the very earliest games as a service titles, and this area of common ground amongst the titles focuses on a continuous string of updates, improvements and expansions to the games. Arguably, this is both one of the best and worst aspects of these types of games. On the worst side, it allows games to be released in an unfinished and sometimes barely working state. On the best side, it allows for living game titles with gameplay and worlds that expand and evolve throughout the years. Some developers have taken massive strides with this format. When it works, it's great for players because the title they want to invest thousands of hours into has a future filled with eagerly awaited updates. As a developer, it is a great system because it allows for creating a large audience which can be shepherded into a strong community. And when developers successfully interact with their community, it strengthens a bond players have with both the game and the developers. This then all works well, just so long as those developers don't take their communities for granted. The end result here though, the real bottom line, again comes down to time. There are now huge, massive virtual shelves full of games that want players to put thousands of hours into them across years of their life. They want players to invest time into relationships with that game's community, and ultimately, they want players to wait for the next big thing, which is always just over the horizon. It's a delicate balance, and some developers perfect this, whilst others take huge risks with their established games audience. Other developers still just see it as an endless opportunity to milk their player base. Whichever way you look at the concept of games as a service though, there's one thing that's certain. It's always very much a waiting game.